may not be suitable for all audiences.
Your final exams.
Art 101 with Mr. Burgher.
Scholars, welcome back to another episode of Art 101 with me, Mr. Burgher, a professional artist and a master educator, and all year long, I've attempted to provide you with the best in art historical content. If you like the content, share it with your neighbors so that next year can be even more successful than the one we're just completing.
Why can't they move us around a little so we can know more?
So thinking about the last video of the year, I was doing lots of research on who I wanted to cover, what I wanted to cover, what I wanted to do, and I ended up with Roy Lichtenstein, an artist who this October the 27th will be 101 years since his birth. So, marking that as the kind of the pivoting point, let's jump right in and start talking a little bit more about our buddy Roy Lichtenstein. If we think about a purely pop art type artist, the artworks of Roy Lichtenstein seem to be just that, purely pop art. But that is just a perception, not at all the reality. He was born on the Upper West Side of New York, and as a teenager began to take watercolor classes and other sorts of classes at Parsons School of Design and the Art Students League in New York. He was also quite passionate about jazz band in high school, playing both the clarinet and the piano. He went on to study under Hoyt Sherman at the School of Fine Arts at Ohio State University, and then taking 3 years off to serve the Army in World War II as a map maker for the U.S. military in France and Belgium. He would return to the United States and resume his studies in art and began also teaching art. And through those times, he worked in several styles, and upon his return, he resumed his art career with an abstract sort of flair to it. In the early 1960s, he began to create works that had the beginning nucleus of his pop art career.
I began again in 1960-61 to paint cartoons still involved in a kind of abstract expressionist format of painting, using humorous sort of animated or animal cartoons like Mickey Mouse and Bugs Bunny and things. The paintings I don't think were successful at all, and I've destroyed most of those paintings. But in '61, got the idea of doing one fairly straight, where the painterliness which had been in my abstract expressionist paintings was no longer part of the painting, and the kind of texture that I would use would be the commercial texture of half-tone dots and flat printed areas. I go through comic books looking for material which seems to hold possibilities for painting, both in its visual impact and in the impact of its written message, which I rarely make up. I don't think I'd be capable of making them up. But I try to take messages which are kind of universal, or in a way either completely meaningless or so involved that they become ludicrous. When I did it, I had no idea that anyone would be interested. In fact, I really felt as though no one in the world would look at these, because they were certainly humorous, and I was serious about them as paintings, but certainly recognized the kind of, recognize how other people would see these works. I know that my work has been accused of looking like the things that I copy, and it certainly does look like the things I copy. And I think a lot of this is that people assume that similar things are identical.
Now that's fascinating, but what is the origin story to his style here? Well, as the story goes, his son David had showed him a Mickey Mouse comic book and said that he wished that his dad could make art as cool as Mickey Mouse and those sorts of characters, as he was not very impressed by the abstraction and the still lives and the other stuff that he was doing as a professional artist. His first most notable work was done in 1961 called Look Mickey, obviously based on Donald Duck and Mickey Mouse and that whole thing, but he actually generated a lot of these but destroyed them because of maybe copyright, maybe because this doesn't quite look like his normal style, so it's possible that those other works didn't really fit stylistically with his vision of where he was going to go with the works, or whatever the reason was, he destroyed them. And this interaction with his sons was very much a factor in the development of Roy Lichtenstein as a pop artist. As moving forward from that point, he was definitely having a focus on that particular style. And because he was working in that style, he also started to kind of run with artists that also had a very similar sort of expectation with their works, focusing on everyday life and their artworks, including artists like George Siegel, Robert Whitman, and Klaus Oldenburg.
And remember, kids keep you young.
No, they don't. My kids almost killed me.
Now, as we look at Roy Lichtenstein's comics, they generally fall into one of two different categories. Either we're looking at arts that are violent action, or they're centered on a more sentimental love type setting.
Talk to me.
One of his most known artworks was Wham! A cartoon American jet shoots down another plane with the obvious wham written across the canvas. The work is actually based on a 1962 DC comic called All American Men at War. So he sees the comic and then he does a variation of it. He does a sketch of this and then takes that sketch and enlarges it to fit a very large scale canvas. Now, there are many artists that work in the comic industry that have criticized Roy Lichtenstein and sued Roy Lichtenstein for the use of their ideas as major works of art. You know, if you did a sketch and you made a few $100 off of it and somebody else recopies that in a larger format and makes $20 million or more off that idea that you generated, there might be some hard feelings there. But at any rate, the other side of his work is better known as his sentimental love paintings, and his Drowning Girl very much quickly comes to mind as a leading example of that type of work. Again, this comes from another DC comic, this time from the 1962 Run for Love, with original text that read, "I don't care if I have a cramp, but..." Roy Lichtenstein shortened the text to "I don't care" and changed the boyfriend's name from Mel to Brad. Lichtenstein had once said, "My work is unlike the comic strip in that every mark is in a different place. The difference may not be great, but it's crucial." And that is true. If we look at this particular work, you can see that he rotates it 90 degrees, he enlarges it, he changes the lettering, he alters a few things in the mark making to make it really focused, even though words, just as much as ideas, can be plagiarized.
Maybe not.
Every artist kind of works in their own sort of way. Roy Lichtenstein would hang these up on a wall and paint using ladders and scaffolds and all kinds of things to be able to make these very large works. But he would also, for the smaller canvases, rotate them around. There was no north, so to speak, in the canvas. It was just kind of spun around and made. To quote Roy Lichtenstein, he said, "I paint my own pictures upside down or sideways. I often don't even remember what most of them are about. The subjects aren't what hold my interest." And so really his work is more about the process of creating and the mark making and the overall practice of making art, as opposed to other variables that some artists will focus on. So him getting ideas from other sources or whatever it might be kind of makes sense, because it's really not about the subject matter so much, but the process of making and working. That's really his focus. Side note, his work was very controversial for its process and the subject of comic books. There was even a Life magazine article titled, "Is He the Worst Artist in the U.S.?" referring to Roy Lichtenstein in 1960.
Kind of a funny story, really.
Yeah, tell me.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's not ha-ha funny. It's not funny.
Although Roy Lichtenstein is primarily known for his paintings, he also would work in other media, including in a large format sculpture, jewelry in silver, bronze, steel, woodcut prints, wood assemblages, and even in film. He certainly had an interest in the genre of what he was doing, but again, it's more about the process to Lichtenstein than the end byproducts. But let's focus for a moment on the ideas that are generated from the comic book. This is kind of significant for a couple of reasons. First off, they're considered mostly cheap kid type activity. Now, if you really get into the big-time collectors, it's no cheap activity, but you can pick up a fairly decent comic book for a couple bucks. And back in the day, you could pick them up way cheap. And that's what he grew up doing as entertainment. That's why he kind of went that direction. And that nostalgia is what makes it critical to Roy Lichtenstein, because many adults will spend a lot of money to get a part of their past back, at least to some degree. Although he did work from many sources, including still lives, he would generally get his ideas from outside type sources, and some critics will look down on his work. For example, in 1952, there was an exhibition of his work in Cleveland, and one of the works in particular that was on display in the exhibition was a work with a $30 price tag on it, and the art critic for the Cleveland News said, "Truly like the doodling of a 5-year-old." However, there are others that would say that he is second only to Andy Warhol and right in alignment with the masters of pop art, including Judy Chicago, Robert Rauschenberg, Jasper Johns, and all the others that were working in this style, in the spectrum of great pop artists. And whether you like him or dislike him, whether you see him more as a plagiarist or a true artist himself in his own right, hopefully we have a better understanding of who Roy Lichtenstein was, why he did what he did, and we have a little bit of an impression of how he would work and how he would work through the process of making art, not just purely regurgitating the things that he saw around him. I hope you enjoy that content as much as I love being able to bring it to you. I try to deliver content to you every week that's going to broaden your artistic horizons, and hopefully next year you'll stick with me so I can do even more of the same. Happy New Year to you, and we'll see you next time.
That's a keeper.